I thought my husband was just taking us out of the city for a change of scenery when he loaded our kids into the car that Saturday morning. I had no idea that his real plan was to drive us to an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere and leave with our children, carefully erasing me from the picture he'd already redrawn in his head. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar streets blur into empty roads and bare trees, thinking we were having one last attempt at family time, while he silently rehearsed how he would explain my absence to everyone who mattered. What he didn't know was that I had stopped believing his stories weeks ago, and that before I got into that car, I had quietly set up a surprise that would destroy the script he thought he was directing. My name is Sarah, I'm 34, and for 7 years I genuinely believed I'd married a decent man. Not a hero, not a saint, just a normal, flawed, loving husband who sometimes forgot to take the trash out and occasionally spent too much time on his phone. Jason and I met at a friend's barbecue when the air smelled of charcoal, cheap beer, and freshly cut grass, and he made me laugh by messing up the grill entirely. He always had that easy charm, the kind that made waitresses smile a little longer and neighbors wave, and I fell for the way he seemed so present when he listened, as if the rest of the world dimmed when I spoke. We built a life in a modest house in the suburbs, with a squeaky screen door, a backyard full of plastic toys, and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and toast in the mornings. Our twins, Lily and Max, were 5, a whirlwind of sticky fingers, mismatched socks, and questions about everything. I loved our chaotic mornings, the sound of tiny feet thumping down the hallway, the sweet smell of cereal and spilled milk, the feel of their small hands grabbing my wrists as they demanded to be lifted up and spun around. Those details were my real wealth. I worked as a nurse, and Jason ran a small contracting business. And although money was rarely abundant, we made it work. Or at least I thought we did. Looking back now, I realize the first cracks appeared long before the cabin. They were small, hairline fractures in the everyday rhythm. The way Jason started coming home a little later, offering vague explanations about late clients and being stuck on site. The way he became strangely possessive of his phone, turning the screen away when I walked by, laughing off any questions with an easy, "Work stuff, you'd be bored." At first, I dismissed it, the way tired people dismiss everything. I told myself I was paranoid, that stress from double shifts was making me oversensitive. I tucked doubt away like an unpaid bill in the back of a drawer. Then the money started going missing. It began with small things. A utility bill slightly higher than expected, a strange bank alert about a credit card payment I didn't remember making. I sat at the kitchen table one night, the surface cool and smooth under my forearms, scrolling through our online statements while the hum of the fridge sounded unusually loud in the quiet house. There were charges from places we didn't go, a bar across town, a boutique hotel, a jewelry store. My chest tightened as I scrolled, that dull, heavy pressure that feels a lot like someone putting a hand over your mouth. When I confronted Jason, he brushed it off with practiced ease. "Babe, those are work expenses," he said, leaning back against the counter, arms crossed loosely over his chest. "Sometimes I have to take clients out, you know that. And the hotel was just for a guy from out of town. I covered it, and he reimbursed me in cash. It's all going back into the business. Don't worry so much." He smiled when he said it, that same boyish, reassuring smile I'd seen 100 times. I wanted to believe him. I remember standing there, the light from the overhead lamp making a pale circle on the floor, feeling like a child at the edge of a dark pool, trying to decide whether to step in. I let it go, or at least pretended to. The second time, I couldn't pretend. It was a Thursday. The kids were at kindergarten. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and damp laundry. I had just returned from a shift and dropped onto the couch, my body aching in that heavy, satisfying way that comes from hours on your feet. My phone buzzed with a notification, an overdraft warning. I frowned, sat up, and opened the banking app. My fingers left a faint imprint of sweat on the glass as I scrolled. Our joint account was nearly empty. Savings had been transferred out in 3 separate transactions over the past month, each labeled with Jason's name. There was no sign of the money on any of our other accounts. My heart thudded against my ribs, each beat a little louder than the last. A prickling heat crept up the back of my neck. My first instinct was still to rationalize. Maybe he made a mistake. Maybe it was transferred to a business account I didn't know about. But alongside that instinct, another voice finally spoke up. Or maybe you already know, and you're just afraid to say it out loud. I called him immediately. He didn't pick up. I called again, then again. On the fourth attempt, he answered, sounding mildly annoyed. "Sarah, I'm on a ladder," he said. "What's the emergency?" "The emergency is our savings are gone," I said, trying to keep my voice level. 3 transfers, your name on all of them. Where is the money, Jason? There was a pause, a small crackle of static. When he spoke again, his voice had that careful, measured tone I'd started to dislike without fully understanding why. "Calm down," he said. "I moved some funds around. Business has been tight. I needed to cover some things. I didn't want to worry you." "Cover what, exactly?" I pressed. "You told me last month things were picking up. And since when do you move thousands of dollars without mentioning it to me?" "Since I became the one keeping us afloat," he snapped, the temper finally flashing through. "You think your shifts cover everything? I'm out here busting my ass, and all you do is nag about numbers on a screen." I stared at the wall, feeling the sharp sting of the unfairness. "Those numbers on a screen are our children's future," I said quietly. "They're rent, food, emergencies. You don't get to empty accounts and call it moving funds around." He exhaled sharply. "We'll talk tonight," he said. "You're tired. You always get like this when you're tired." Then he hung up. That night he came home with cheap takeout and an overly bright smile, as if greasy noodles could patch financial betrayal. We argued, of course, voices raised in the kitchen, the kids peeking nervously from the living room, until I turned on a cartoon and kissed their heads, pretending everything was fine. Jason insisted it was temporary, that he'd pay it back, that he'd landed a big contract that would fix everything. "It's just numbers, Sarah," he said, rubbing his temples. "You're making it bigger than it is." The problem was that it had stopped being about numbers. It was about how easily he lied, how practiced he seemed, how quickly he accused me of being emotional whenever I pressed for details. A cold, uneasy weight settled in my stomach and refused to leave. The real turning point came by accident. A week later, I was in the bathroom helping Lily brush her teeth while Max played on the floor with a toy car. Jason's phone, which he'd left on the dresser, lit up with a notification. Normally, I would have looked away. I believed in privacy. But something about the way it buzzed, persistent, rhythmic, made my hand move almost on its own. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked into the bedroom, and glanced at the screen. A message preview glowed bright in the dim room. "Did you tell her yet? We can't do this forever. I'm not going to be your secret wife in the shadows." Secret wife. My breath hitched. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching thin. I picked up the phone. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I opened the message thread. There, in a series of blue and gray bubbles, was the life Jason had been living parallel to ours. Her name was Emily. They had been seeing each other for over a year. He called her baby, my real future, told her he felt trapped and judged at home. In one message, he wrote that once the custody stuff was sorted, they'd move away and start clean. Custody stuff. I felt the floor tilt under me, a dizzy, nauseating lurch. Lily's voice floated down the hallway, thin and distant. "Mommy, can I spit now?" I forced myself to move, to put the phone down, to walk back into the bathroom and smile at my daughter as if my entire reality hadn't just split open. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the phone in my hand, the screen's cold light painting my fingers in pale blue. I scrolled further back in the messages, my eyes burning. I saw references to that old cabin, mentions of, if she loses it, it'll look bad in court, and one line that made my skin crawl. If she freaks out around the kids, that's even better. Judges frown on instability. It wasn't just an affair, it was a strategy. He wasn't planning to leave, he was planning to take. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The way he had been needling me lately, picking fights, twisting my words, making me second-guess my reactions. The way he told his mother on the phone, not knowing I could hear, that I'd been snappy and out of control. The way he'd suggested, more than once, that maybe I should take some time for myself, see a therapist, get something on record that would prove later that I was unstable. It was emotional warfare, dressed up as concern. I cried that night, quietly, my shoulders shaking, my face buried in my hands while the dishwasher hummed in the background. The smell of leftover dinner clung to the air, and the kitchen felt both too small and too empty. Once the tears passed, something else settled in their place, a cold, clear resolve. He thought he was the only one who could plan. The next days were a blur of careful, deliberate steps. I copied the entire message thread and emailed it to myself from a new, secret account. I took photos of bank statements, wrote down transaction numbers, noted dates and times. I reached out to a lawyer recommended by a social worker at the hospital, a woman with a calm voice and tired eyes who had clearly seen too many versions of my story. In her office, the air smelled of coffee and old carpet, and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. I told her everything, from the missing money to the messages about custody stuff. She listened, taking notes, occasionally nodding in a way that said this was horrible but not surprising. "He's building a narrative," she said finally. "Unstable wife, responsible father. It's textbook. The cabin worries me, though. Why mention it?" "There's this old place his family owns," I explained. "Near the lake, no neighbors for miles. We've been there before, but not with the kids. He's talked about it lately, about how we need a reset, some time away from distractions." She tapped her pen against the pad. "If he wants to provoke a reaction, isolating you is the easiest way. No witnesses, just his version afterward." She met my eyes. "You need to be 2 steps ahead. Do not go anywhere with him and the kids without someone knowing exactly where you are. And we need evidence that you are calm, rational, protective, not unstable." Protective. The word settled into my bones like a promise. I thought long and hard about what to do. I could refuse to go anywhere with him, but then he'd adapt. He could still twist things. I needed to let him think his plan was working, right up until the moment it didn't. And I needed someone watching when it all unfolded. That's how I ended up talking to a child services liaison a few days later, under the guise of asking general questions about custody. I showed her some of the texts, carefully leaving out certain details to protect myself legally at this stage. She frowned, took notes, and said that if any scenario arose where I felt the kids were at risk, I should call immediately. "If you know you're heading into something that feels wrong," she added, "set up a check-in with someone. A welfare check can be requested if needed." The idea clicked into place in my mind. When Jason suggested the cabin trip the following week, I was ready. He brought it up casually over dinner, the smell of tomato sauce and garlic thick in the air. The kids were smearing spaghetti across their plates, laughing. "Hey," he said, twirling his fork, "I was thinking, what if we take them up to the cabin this weekend? No screens, no neighbors, just us. We could really talk. Might do you good, Sarah. You've been so tense." My heart stuttered, but my face didn't show it. I lifted my eyes, forced a small smile, and said, "You know what? Maybe that's not a bad idea." His expression flickered for a fraction of a second. Surprise, then satisfaction. "Really?" he asked. "So you're on board?" "Sure," I said, "if it'll help us reset." That night I barely slept, but it wasn't the same helpless insomnia as before. I lay in the dark, listening to his soft snores, and went over every step of my own plan. By morning, I had committed to it fully. On Saturday, the air was crisp and cold, the kind that made your breath come out in little white clouds. The kids were excited, bouncing around the living room in their little jackets and boots, their laughter echoing off the walls. I packed warm clothes, snacks, their favorite stuffed animals. I also packed something else, a small recorder tucked into the lining of my jacket, my phone fully charged, with location sharing turned on for my sister, and a quiet, prearranged agreement with my lawyer and the liaison. If they didn't hear from me by a certain time, they'd act. Before we left, I, absent-mindedly, mentioned to Jason that my sister had been checking in on us a lot lately. "She worries," I said lightly, zipping Lily's coat. "She made me promise to send her cute cabin pics. You know how she is." Jason rolled his eyes but didn't object. He had always underestimated my family, assuming they were as easily manipulated as he believed I was. The drive started out normal enough. The kids chattered in the back seat, pressed up against their car seats, pointing out cows, old barns, and patches of snow clinging to the fields. The interior of the car smelled faintly of stale fast food and the citrusy air freshener Jason had hung from the rearview mirror. The heater hummed, filling the cabin with dry warmth. I watched the landscape change. Houses thinned out, trees grew denser, the sky seemed to lower itself over the road. Jason hummed along to the radio, his left hand loosely draped over the wheel, his right occasionally reaching back to pat Max's leg or adjust the mirror. To anyone else, he would have looked like a devoted dad on a wholesome family outing. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked to the clock more often than necessary, the way he barely spoke to me, as if the words were better saved for later. When we turned off the main road onto a narrow, cracked lane flanked by trees, a hollow feeling settled in my chest. Shadows flickered over the hood as branches swayed overhead. Small stones crunched under the tires. The kids quieted, sensing the change, their earlier excitement softening into wide-eyed curiosity. "We're almost at the secret cabin, right, Daddy?" Lily asked. "Almost, Bug," he said, smiling at her in the rearview mirror. "You're going to love it. It's our special place." Our special place. The cabin appeared after a final bend in the road, huddled among tall, skeletal trees, like a secret that had grown tired of being kept. The wood siding was weathered, grayed by time and rain. The roof sagged slightly in the middle. The porch steps creaked when you walked on them. I remembered that from the one time we'd come here alone, before the kids were born, when it had felt romantic instead of ominous. The air outside was cold and sharp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and old leaves. No other houses were visible. It was just us, the cabin, and the whisper of the wind through bare branches. Jason killed the engine. For a moment, we sat in the sudden silence, the ticking of the cooling metal strangely loud. My heart thudded in my chest, steady but fast. I felt the recorder pressing lightly against my ribs under my jacket. "Okay, everybody out," he said cheerfully. "Adventure time." We tumbled out of the car. Lily's boots crunched on the gravel. Max clung to his stuffed dinosaur, looking around with big, serious eyes. I inhaled deeply, the cold air burning my lungs, and glanced at my watch. Right on schedule. Inside, the cabin smelled like dust, old wood, and the faint, lingering echo of a summer campfire from years past. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light sneaking in through the dirty windows. The floorboards creaked under our feet. Jason busied himself starting a fire in the small fireplace, tossing kindling into the grate, the crackle of dry wood soon filling the space. "Can we explore?" Lily asked, already halfway to the small hallway. "In a minute," Jason said. "Stay here with Mom for now. I want to talk to her." His tone had shifted. The cheerfulness faded, replaced by something controlled, measured. He brushed off his hands, stood up, and turned to face me fully. The kids were watching, one on the worn-out couch, the other sitting cross-legged on the rug. "Kids," he said, his voice soft but firm, "why don't you play with your toys over there for a bit? Mom and I are going to have a grown-up conversation." Lily pursed her lips, but nodded. Max hugged his dinosaur tighter. They moved to the corner, within sight, but just far enough away that he could pretend they weren't listening. He looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to assess how easy this would be. "So," he began, shoving his hands into his pockets, "we both know things haven't been good between us." I didn't answer. The fire crackled, throwing little sparks and casting moving shadows on the wooden walls. My hands lay relaxed at my sides, but inside, every muscle was coiled. "You've been volatile," he continued, snapping, crying, accusing me of things. "The kids see it, Sarah. They're not stupid. It's not good for them. I thought maybe, out here, without distractions, you could finally hear yourself." I tilted my head slightly. "Hear myself," I repeated. "Yes," he sighed, as if he were the one carrying a burden. "I've been talking to people, lawyers, counselors. They all say the same thing. If a parent is unstable, it's bad for the kids. Sometimes the healthiest thing is to limit their exposure, to protect them from emotional damage." My blood ran cold, but my voice stayed calm. "You mean protect them from me?" "If you keep acting like this, yes," he said, and there was an edge of impatience now. "I mean, look at you. Drive away from this cabin, and tell everyone Mommy had a breakdown. The kids gasped softly. I saw Lily clutch Max's hand, their small fingers tangling together. Jason glared at me, his eyes flicking briefly toward them. "Don't drag them into this," he hissed. "You're upsetting them." "They deserve to know the truth," I replied. Then I lowered my voice slightly, leaning in. "And so does the judge." He frowned. "What judge?" "The one who's going to see the recording," I said, just loud enough. His eyes widened, darting to my jacket, then to the corners of the room. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I straightened, feeling the device press against my ribs. "You think you're the only one who can plan, Jason? You think I didn't notice when you started poking at me, whispering 'unstable' in all the right ears? I may have been slow to catch on, but once I did, I learned fast." He took a step toward me, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "Turn it off. Now. We're not doing this." "You already are," I said. "You've been doing it for months. This is just the first time someone else is listening." He opened his mouth to snap back, but a sound cut through the charged air, the low crunch of tires on gravel outside. We both froze. His brow furrowed. "Did you tell someone we were coming?" he asked sharply. "Of course," I said. "Responsible parents don't disappear with their kids into the woods without telling anyone where they are. You should know that." The engine cut off. A car door slammed, then another. Voices floated through the thin walls, calm, professional, unfamiliar. Jason's face drained of color. The knock on the door was firm, not aggressive. He hesitated, then lurched toward it. When he opened it, cold air rushed in, along with two figures wearing jackets with badges clipped to them. "Mr. and Mrs. Cooper?" one of them asked, scanning our faces. "We're from County Child Services. We received a call requesting a welfare check for 2 minors at this location." Jason spun around to me, fury and disbelief warring on his face. "You called them?" he hissed. I met the social worker's eyes. "I set up a check-in with them days ago," I said calmly. "Just in case. I'm glad you're here." The kids instinctively moved closer to me, pressing against my legs. The social worker's gaze softened as she took them in, their wide eyes, the tension in their small shoulders. "We just need to make sure everyone is safe," she said gently. "Mind if we come in?" Jason looked like he wanted to slam the door in her face, but he didn't dare. He stepped aside. They entered, bringing with them the smell of cold air and car exhaust, the faint jingle of keys and paperwork. The room suddenly felt smaller, but safer. "What's going on here today?" the other worker asked, his eyes moving between us, then landing on the children. Jason started talking first, words tumbling out fast and offensive. "My wife has been unstable," he said. "She's been paranoid, accusing me of cheating, of stealing. I brought us here to try to calm things down, to get away from the noise. I'm worried about the kids around her mood swings." I let him talk. I watched the workers' faces carefully, the way their expressions remained neutral, the way they jotted down notes without reacting. When he finally ran out of words, I spoke. "My husband emptied our accounts without telling me," I said, my voice steady. "I found messages on his phone to another woman where he talked about leaving me and taking the kids. He specifically mentioned using this cabin trip to provoke a reaction from me that would help him in a custody fight. I can show you those messages. I can also show you the emails I sent my lawyer and your office before this trip, expressing concern." The female worker's eyes sharpened. "You contacted our office prior to coming here?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I didn't want to cancel the trip because I suspected he had a plan. I needed to see it clearly, so I made one of my own." Jason scoffed. "She's lying. She's spinning everything." "I'm also recording this conversation," I added, my gaze on him, "because I know how you twist things when there are no witnesses." For a moment, the room was electric with silence. Then the male worker spoke, his tone gentle but firm. "For now, why don't we separate a bit?" he suggested. "I'll talk to you, sir, outside. My colleague will talk to Mrs. Cooper and the children in here. That way everyone gets to share their perspective." Jason opened his mouth. To refuse, to argue, I don't know. But the look on the worker's face told him it wasn't a request. He grabbed his jacket, shot me a look full of venom, and stepped out, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud. Once they were gone, the other worker turned to me. "You said you have messages?" she asked. I nodded, my hands suddenly trembling just a little as I pulled out my phone. I handed it to her, open to the thread. She scrolled slowly, her eyes scanning the words I had memorized too many times. I could see the shift in her posture as she read the part about custody stuff, the cabin, provoking me. "I see," she murmured. She glanced at the kids. "Why don't you two draw me a picture while I talk to Mommy?" she suggested, pulling a small notepad and some crayons from her bag. They complied eagerly, grateful for something simple to do, their small bodies relaxing slightly as they focused on colors and lines. The worker asked me questions then, about the money, the affair, the lawyer, my preparations. I answered everything, the story pouring out in measured, organized pieces I'd rehearsed in my head on countless sleepless nights. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. By the time they finished their assessment and stepped outside to confer, my legs felt weak. I sank onto the couch, watching Lily draw a crooked little house and Max scribble a dinosaur beside it. The fire had settled into a steady burn, casting a warm glow that felt at odds with the knot of tension in my chest. When the workers came back in, Jason's face was thunderous. He refused to look at me. "For now," the female worker said carefully, "we're not making any immediate removal orders. But given the information we've received, we're filing a report. There will be follow-up, including with the court if necessary. We strongly recommend you both engage with legal counsel and consider a safe, structured separation. The children will stay with their mother tonight." Jason exploded. "You can't just decide that," he snapped. "This is my cabin, my kids." "We're not deciding custody," she replied calmly. "We're responding to a welfare concern. At this moment, given the documented threats and plans, we believe the safest immediate environment is with their mother, in a familiar home, not an isolated cabin." He looked at me then, eyes burning. "You think you've won," he spat. "You think this little stunt is going to save you. You just proved how crazy you are, Sarah, bringing strangers into our family business." I stood up slowly, feeling every inch of my height, every ounce of the strength I'd had to grow. I stepped between him and the kids without even thinking about it. "No," I said quietly. "What I proved is that you're not the only one who knows how to play a long game. You tried to make me look like a hysterical mother in the woods. Instead, you just showed them exactly who you are." His mouth opened, then closed. For once, he had no ready script to fall back on. We left the cabin under the watchful eyes of the workers. The kids held my hands, their small fingers squeezing mine so tightly it almost hurt. The air outside was still cold, but it felt different now. Less like a threat, more like a deep, bracing inhale after being underwater for too long. In the weeks and months that followed, everything changed. There were legal battles, of course. Jason fought hard, trying to salvage the narrative he'd carefully built. But the text messages to Emily, the welfare check record, the pre-trip email to Child Services, the recording from the cabin, they all formed a chain of evidence too strong to snap. The court saw not a hysterical wife, but a woman who recognized danger and planned a measured response. They saw a father willing to manipulate his children's environment for leverage. They saw a pattern. In the end, I was granted primary custody. Jason got supervised visitation at first, with a gradual path to more time as long as he adhered to strict conditions. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was protection, and that mattered more than any illusion of harmony. We moved out of the old house into a smaller place closer to my parents. The first night there, the kids shared a bed, falling asleep tangled together, their faces soft and peaceful in the glow of a cheap nightlight shaped like a moon. I sat on the floor outside their room, my back against the wall, and finally let myself cry. Not from fear or humiliation this time, but from sheer, exhausted relief. Sometimes, when they're with him on his allotted time, I catch myself still tensing up, waiting for the worst. But it doesn't come the way it almost did in that cabin. Now there are eyes on him, paper trails, boundaries. Months after everything settled, I took the twins to a small cabin of our own, one I rented through a listing service, a bright, cheerful place near a lake with other families in neighboring houses. The air smelled of pine and sunscreen. The kids ran in and out, dragging sand and laughter behind them. We roasted marshmallows, and I taught them how to look for constellations in the star-streaked sky. At one point, Lily crawled into my lap, sticky fingers pressing against my wrist. "Mommy," she asked, her voice sleepy, "are cabins still scary?" I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the warm, solid weight of her body, the soft tickle of her hair against my chin. "Not all cabins," I said. "Just the ones where people try to pretend love means control." She thought about that for a moment, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Max, half asleep beside us, mumbled something about dinosaurs protecting us in the woods. I looked up at the sky, the stars sharp and clear in the cold air, and felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. He had driven me to an abandoned cabin, convinced he would come back with our children, and the story neatly rewritten in his favor. He never imagined that I would walk in already knowing my lines, and that, this time, the audience wouldn't be on his side. The surprise wasn't that I refused to break. The real surprise was that, for the first time in a long time, I refused to play the victim in his script at all. I was writing my own now, and in this one, my kids and I make it out of the woods together.